Hello, and thank you for attending the VMUG virtual session for ControlUp. I'm Nanette Volusius. I'll be your moderator today. And we also have with us Tom Fenton, who's a technical marketing manager at ControlUp, and Trentent and Tom, who's a senior technical evangelist. Trent, take it away.
Thanks, Nanette. So I'm excited to share with you guys the first look at ControlUp 8.1. This is the first version of ControlUp that we do with deep integration into Horizon. So with that said, I have an agenda here that we're just going to go over for some housekeeping, and I'm just going to give a quick company overview for anyone who's not familiar with ControlUp and what we do and who we are. And then we're going to go straight into the live demos. So that includes our ControlUp real-time product, where we can look and see how we actually monitor endpoint devices or servers as well. And actually we'll get into the real-time performance troubleshooting scenario, where we'll actually diagnose an issue with a server or with a process going from the high level all the way down to the low level. And then we'll get into monitoring and optimizing user experience, where we can actually see how ControlUp can actually monitor what the user actually experiences and what we can do to actually resolve those issues. From there, then I'll actually hand it off to my colleague Tom, who will go over the VMware Horizon feature highlight. We'll talk about our integration into VMware Horizon, and then back to me for. So to start ControlUp, we're about 150 employees. We're headquartered in San Jose with R&D in Israel. We've got some very strong financial backing, so we're very solid as a company, and we're growing very, very quickly. And we've got over 1,000 customers today and constantly adding more, and we're constantly growing. So we're in a very good position. So what we do, we actually connect into all of your different resources. We connect into your VMware ESXi infrastructure, your Citrix Xen server infrastructure, Hyper-V, Nutanix with Acropolis, and then we can connect into all the virtual servers and virtual desktops within those environments. We can actually connect into your cloud resources as well, so we can monitor any of your Windows and some of the Linux virtual servers within those cloud services, and we've got some special integration with Amazon Web Services. What ControlUp does as a whole is we do monitoring with collective thresholds, where you can actually color code how your environment is. We do analytics with collective benchmarking, so we can actually take the metadata that's produced from your performance metrics, and we can actually compare it to how the community baseline is, and we can actually present that information back to you. And then we're not just a monitoring product, we're also a management product, and with management comes remediation, so we can actually resolve issues without having to leave the console, giving you that single pane of glass to actually do everything you need to keep your environment running. And we can do that with the help of some crowdsourced scripting. So anyone in the community could be writing scripts that solves a problem for them. They can submit it back to us, and we'll add it to the console automatically. So let's get right into the live demos. I'll start with the real-time performance troubleshooting, and then we'll get into the monitoring and optimizing the user experience. And then we'll get into VMware Horizon feature highlights and the ControlUp automation. So for the real-time performance troubleshooting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up ControlUp. And what we see here is I've actually got my ControlUp display. I've got my logical tree structure here on the left that actually shows the different hypervisors that we connect into. And then as well, we've got our EUC environments showing we connect into Citrix and now the Horizon, VMware Horizon. And then we also monitor NetScale's Linux, and then your logical folder structure here of all your objects that we monitor. In the center here, I've actually got all the different hypervisors that I'm focusing on. So I'm focusing on the hosts, and we can actually see that I've actually got one hypervisor here who seems to be in some level of stress. He's got a high stress level, and looking at him, we can see his memory is about 88%, which I'm actually used to for this host. So that's not out of the ordinary. It's why it's only yellow, but we are having a data store IOPS issue. So this particular host seems to be having some kind of health problems or some kind of performance problems. Something is sucking up his IOPS. So in order to troubleshoot this, we can actually click on this little hamburger icon here, and this brings up our virtual expert. And what we can do with the virtual expert is we can actually navigate to the different views that he's suggesting to help us troubleshoot this issue further. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the machines detailed view. And what ControlUp does is it highlights the area that we're troubleshooting. So we're troubleshooting the data store IOPS, and we can see it's at 39,000 IOPS or so. and it's on VM host 2 that's having this issue. We can actually see that it's drilled into the ESXi host, showing us the virtual machines underneath. And the virtual machine that seems to be causing our issue here is Tools 2012 VM. So ControlUp has sorted all of the virtual machines by the column that it thinks is causing our issue. So very quickly, we're able to identify what machine might be having our health issue or might be generating our issue. And what we can do within ControlUp is I can right-click on this object, and I get a contextually sensitive menu that will actually give us the context for what we're troubleshooting. So it knows it's a machine object, and it's giving us a menu specifically for troubleshooting this machine. So I could do something like I can reboot it or shut it down if I think that might solve the problem. But since I'm not entirely sure what the problem is, I can actually click on this hamburger icon again and drill into the next step. So I'm going to drill into the sessions view. And now this takes us into the virtual machine. So at this stage, I've got an agent installed on this machine. That's how we're getting this additional detailed information. And we can actually see that there's a user, Steve DeVincent. He's the one actually causing our IOPS issue. So going all the way from the host level into the virtual machine, we can now see at the session level which user is causing our IOPS issue. So again, I can right-click on this object and I can do a series of remediation actions. Perhaps I can log off the user and so on and so forth. But again, I'm not entirely sure what this user is doing. So I'm going to again click on the hamburger icon, and we can drill into the individual processes view. And from here, we can actually see the processes that's causing our issue. So we can see that it's a dynamo.exe process that's generating our 20,000 IOPS. So if you can imagine from the very top level of what your host is seeing, all the way down to the process level on a virtual machine residing within that host, we can see what individual process is generating that entire issue from top to bottom. Now, we can right-click on this object again, and we get our process contextual menu, where we can actually do some remediation action here. So we can end the process, kill the process, we can throttle the process, and so on and so forth. However, I still don't know what is actually going on. Is this normal? Is this expected behavior? And I actually don't know. So what I can do is if I right-click on this process, I can actually get a session screenshot of what this user is actually doing. So if I choose to do this without notifying the user, I can actually see that there's a process here called IOmeter, and it's actually working. The UI is updating, which means it's not frozen, it's not spun out of control, that it looks like it's operating as it's intended. So what I can do is I can actually right-click on Steve here, and I can actually initiate a chat where I can actually ask him, hey man, maybe save this for after hours. You're impacting users on this server as well. I'm not entirely sure what he's doing, so I can actually find out now by actually communicating to him. So this is how within ControlUp we can actually drill down from the very high level all the way down to the bottom level, and then actually manage these objects and manage these resources so we can actually take corrective action to actually solve these problems. So that's how in ControlUp we can do our real-time performance troubleshooting. All of these metrics are being updated every 3 seconds. You can see that they're being updated constantly. So everything is immediate and up to date, and we think this is really great. So the next thing I want to bring into now is how we can actually manage and optimize your user experience. So I'm going to go back to my Acme organization here, and I'm actually just going to focus on the sessions view. And here I'm going to type my name. I know I've got my user out here. Here he is. And what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at myself. I'm on a Horizon VDI machine, and I'm running Acrobat. And I can actually bring up my user session here, and we can see I'm using Acrobat. So what we're going to see is we're going to see the user input delay actually changes to how I'm using the application. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate this 3D model here, and you can see the priority is normal. And because this model is a 3D model and we're actually in a virtual machine that does not have 3D graphics, we can see the user input delay is actually quite high. It's about 125 milliseconds or so. So I'm getting some moderately poor performance here. And as I continue to manipulate this, ControlUp will pick up that the performance is poor, and it'll actually adjust the process priority for me. So because this isn't a GPU accelerated virtual machine, all of the 3D application rendering is being done in CPU. And so ControlUp has picked up that because this is a CPU intensive application, we can actually give it more process priority to try to improve that user experience by giving it more CPU cycles to do the work that it needs to do. And this is all done automatically through our ControlUp automation engine. So I'm just going to get into what that looks like very quickly. So if I look at the triggers here for this, right here, and so if I click on this and go edit, we can see that we're actually focusing on the process record type. And what we're looking for is we're looking for the user input delay to be greater than or equal to 15 milliseconds, and that the process name is AcroRead32, aka Adobe Reader. And so if it's in this state for more than 3 seconds, we're going to run this action, set process priority to above normal. So we'll take a look at what this script looks like. Okay, so I got it right here. I'm going to hit modify, and if we go through it, we can actually see that what we're doing is we're assigning this to the process record, and our execution context is the target machine, with it being the local system that it's running on. If I click on script, we can see it's very simple. It's just a 2-liner, and actually this could just be a 1-liner if I just remove the hash, but I'm setting it to be 1, the value of 1, which is above normal, and I'm looking for one argument, which is the ID argument. So if I click on here, we can see we're passing in the process ID into the script. And then this script is doing that variable substitution and then executing this 1 line, which is what increases our process priority. So with ControlUp, with adding this complex logic in the trigger, we can actually simplify our scripts, and we can actually make our scripts very simple in order to add this power and flexibility into our product. So we think that's pretty cool. We think that's pretty amazing. And now I would like to get into our new feature with 8.1, our VMware Horizon feature highlights. So with that, I'm actually going to pass the screen to you, Tom.
Thank you, Trent. In my presentation, I'm going to go ahead and show you my Horizon environment. Then we're going to take a look at how you add a Horizon environment to ControlUp, what the connection broker looks like in ControlUp, what the desktop pools look like in ControlUp. I'll show you how you go and find issues with your desktops in ControlUp, and then we'll take a look at some historical data. So what you're looking at here is the Horizon 7 administrator. You can see I have the dashboard up. The connection server is showing a red box here, and that is because the certificate isn't valid. That's the only reason it is a red box, and there really isn't any way to say not to show it as a red box. The desktop pools, I have 3 of them. The first one is a manual desktop pool with 1 virtual machine in it. Then I have the instant clone pool, and then I have the virtual machine app streaming. This is the new virtual machine app streaming that was released in Horizon 7.9, and it's where you can stream applications from Windows 10. Hadn't really worked with it a whole lot, and so I wanted to set it up and see what it looks like in ControlUp. You can also see the different machines in the Horizon 7 administrator and the events, but it doesn't really give you a whole lot of deep insight into what the machines do, and that's where ControlUp really complements VMware Horizon. Let's go ahead, and here's my ControlUp session, a lot smaller. And to add the EUC environment, just come up here, add EUC environment, have the choice between Citrix and VMware Horizon. I'm going to go with VMware Horizon. May call this Fenton-VDI. Give it the IP address of my connection broker, 61. I do have credentials stored on it, so I'll go ahead and use those and say OK. And it really just takes a few minutes for it to go out there, get the information it needs, and then bring it into a ControlUp. This is a small environment, but even big environments come in relatively quickly if you give them the right credentials. So let's try that again. Goes up there. You can see the little icon. It's applying the changes. Over here, I now have the EUC environments. I'll expand that out. I have the Fenton VDI environment. There's a little black dot there that cycles through until it's added. And it added the connection servers and the desktop pools. Go ahead and dive into the connection servers. This top line shows the overall stress of all your connection servers, the overall health of them. And then below that, it divides them out by each connection server. In my case, I only have one connection server. Right here, I have under the stress level, it's set as low. And the reason it's set as low is because I have the connection server certificate is invalid. I'm just using a local one. Didn't really want to set up and go to a CA authority and get one. So as opposed to seeing red like we saw in the Horizon Administrator, it's just showing yellow. So that way, when something really does go bad, it will be red and I'll be notified of it. Shows the overall health of the virtual machine that it's running on. Then if I scroll to the right, it gives me the stuff that I'm kind of more interested in from a Horizon perspective, the IP address of the connection server, the external URL of the connection server, the certificate of it, and whether it's legal or not. And then over here, it tells which features are enabled in the connection server. In this case, I have everything enabled. I have the Composer license, which is for your link clones, and I have the instant clone licensed as well. Take a look at the desktop pools. Focus in on those. You can see here under the machines, the overall health of the virtual machines and who's been assigned to them. I pull to the left, it says things like which Horizon pool they're in, what the state is, if it's available, unavailable, or connected. Looks like 3 of them are connected. Looks like the status of the agent, this is the ControlUp agent. I have one that isn't installed yet. And one of the neat things about ControlUp is you can drag it up here and it'll group by, so I can only display the machines that don't have the agent installed. And if I want to install it, I can just right click that, say okay, and it'll go and install the agent. And when you install the agent, it lets you take a look at the processors, gives you more introspection into that virtual machine, and it only takes a second to do it. You can also see down here, I have another machine that doesn't have that, it says the agent is updated or out of date, and to update it, I can just right click it and say update agent. That's all it takes to do it. By the way, this is a thin client. It was a Windows 10 IoT thin client that I installed the ControlUp agent in it, so I can actually monitor this particular thin client as well. Diving into the desktop pools, focus in on those again. You can see that this one is having some stress issues. So let's go ahead and take a look at it, see why it is. Looks like it has some CPU issues on it. So let's dive into it. Take a look at the processes, and the CPU, this process VLC, is using 37% of the CPU, and of course that's also causing the PCOIP process to use a lot of CPU activity as well. I can go ahead and look at the session on that guy and send the user a note saying what's going on here. What's going on with VLC? Send it to him, and I'll go ahead and bring up his session. And here's the message that he'll see, and let's pretend like he doesn't really know what's going on. So we'll go back over here to ControlUp. And just as we showed you previously, you can go ahead and kill that process if you want. Let's go over to processes. Processes, kill process. And that guy should disappear in just a second. And you can see that the usage of it is gone. The CPU usage is no longer the VLC because it's gone. If we don't want that application to run ever again on his system, we can go ahead to processes and disable process execution. Enter the process that you don't want to have them start again, say okay. And then when he tries to start it, he will not be able to. And if we want to re-enable to, we can go to processes and enable process execution, clicking that, disable blocks. Be able to go ahead and start it if he needs to. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to you, Trent.
Thanks, Tom. All right, so now I'm excited to go over something that is kind of near and dear to me, and that's the ControlUp automation engine. So we'll go over some use cases here, and we'll see what it can do for you in your environment. So the very first demo I'm going to do, there we go. Very first demo I'm going to do is a reduce idle and disconnect session load. So at ControlUp, we collect metadata from some of the performance metrics within your environment, and one of the things we do is we collect session state. And what we saw is that out of 6 million sessions that we reviewed over the course of about a month, about 30% of them are always in some kind of state of either idle or disconnected. And so these users who are in an idle or disconnected state, they're consuming resources. They're consuming CPU, they're consuming memory. They're essentially robbing users who are being productive of additional resources that they might have. And so that might cause some slowness, especially if your servers are under some level of contention, which if they're shared servers, with like a host hosting lots of virtual machines or within a remote desktop services machine itself, they will be having users underneath. So these users could be consuming resources from users who are trying to be productive. So what we're going to do within ControlUp is I'm actually going to focus on some machines that I have here. And I'm actually just going to look at some of these PVS machines here. So I'm actually just going to RDP to this one. And we're actually going to see what we can do with ControlUp automation to help reduce the impact of these idle and disconnected users. So I'm going to log on to this machine all through the ControlUp console. ControlUp is a built-in remote desktop manager. Okay, and once I come in, I'm just going to double click to drill into this machine, and we can see my user session here along with Rogers, and we can see that I'm consuming about 547 megabytes. I've got some CPU utilization going, and right now my user, he's not really doing anything, he's just logged in. That's totally fine. But now what we're going to picture is we're going to picture my user going into a disconnected state. My memory working set is currently 713 megabytes. So this is just a fresh logon on a Windows 2019 box. I'm consuming almost a gig of memory, not doing anything, just sitting at the desktop. So if you can imagine, my user is going to go for lunch. And so when he goes for lunch, he's either going to go idle or disconnected. In this scenario, I'm going to pretend that he's going to go disconnected. And what ControlUp is going to do is it's going to pick up on this state change. So the state right now is active. It's now disconnected. ControlUp is going to pick up that it's gone into a disconnected state. And in order to improve the resources of those other users on this box, it's going to reduce the process priority from normal to below normal, giving the users on that box more CPU cycles. It's going to take the memory working set and it's going to trim it down to as low as possible. So this is going to free up the memory on here. So boom, we can see the process priority goes to below normal. So now users who are on this box who require more CPU cycles are going to get that little extra slice. And then on top of that, from the memory working set, we can see that it had got reduced significantly. So boom, from like 800 megabytes down to 31 megabytes. So now if people require, productive users require more memory to be paged into their application, they have that capability now. They have that room on this box. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pretend that this user has come back from lunch. So we're going to remote desktop back into this machine. And I'm connected in back at my desktop here. If I go back to my organization, we'll see ControlUp will actually pick up that the state change has changed back to active. It's going to adjust the process priority going all the way back to normal. And we can see that we just let Windows Memory Manager natively start consuming memory again. So boom, our process priority is back to what it was previously, and our memory working set is just consuming pages now that the programs that are running within the session are asking for. So we think this is a really cool optimization and something that's really easy to turn on in your environment. So how you can do that is we actually have within ControlUp, within our triggers, we have these 4 triggers that determine these states. So we've got these 2 that determine whether a session goes from disconnected to active or from active to disconnected. And then these ones where we try to determine whether we go from active to idle. So these are actually advanced triggers. They work on the session record. And all we're looking for is that for this particular trigger, that the session state is active and the idle time is greater than or equal to 15 minutes. So this is an active session, which means its screen is being remoted. And if the idle time is greater than or equal to 15 minutes, we consider this a idle session. And you can actually click on the filter editor here and adjust these values if 15 minutes is too aggressive or if you need more aggressiveness. And then we go next. And what we can see is these are the 2 actions we're actually executing. So we're actually executing the trim process working set, which is what reduces that memory footprint of this idle or disconnected session. And then we actually run an additional action, adjust the process priority based on session state. So these are 2 PowerShell scripts that actually execute once this state change occurs. Okay, and then the same actually happens for going into the active state. We actually don't have any criteria required there for this particular one. And here we can actually see we just run one single action, adjust process priority based on session state. So we've got one PowerShell script that can actually has a little bit of logic in it that I can actually determine whether it's an idle or a disconnected state or an active state, and it'll actually adjust the process priority based on those properties. So what do these scripts look like? So if I go into the script actions, and we'll look at the trim process memory working set first, I can hit modify. And if I hit settings, we can see it's assigned to the session. Its execution context is the target machine, and it runs under the local system credentials, the local system security context. And if we go to the script was written by the great Guy Leach, and we can actually see all of the source code for the script. So if you want to review it and make sure everything is kosher, we have everything available to you in our ControlUp script library. And then the arguments for this is we just pass in the session ID, the working set size to reduce it to. So if you find 0 is too aggressive, you can actually adjust this to be 10 or 100 megabytes or whatever you think would be an appropriate value. And as well, we can actually exclude processes. And so you can do this by adding more processes with the / delimiter. Okay, and then the other one was the adjust process priority based on session state. So I actually wrote this script. And if I choose to modify, we can actually see the settings for it. Again, we're targeting the session, we're looking at the target machine, and we're going under the local system context. And the script itself, again, it's all open source, it's all PowerShell. We have it all available to you on our ControlUp script library for you to review, or if you want to modify it, if it's not meeting your needs, you can feel free to do so. And then the arguments itself, so these are all the arguments I'm passing into the script. So I'm passing in the session ID, the actual user, the state, so whether it's active or disconnected, the idle time in minutes, and the process priority floor. So this is where you can actually adjust where you want that to be changed to. So right now I have it being changed to below normal, but you can change it to any one of these there. So if you want to actually even reduce it even further, you can set it to idle. And then the last one is, again, excluded processes. So again, from here you can actually do a forward delimiter and add your process name in order to exclude further processes from having their priorities be manipulated. So we think that's pretty cool, and we think that if you just turn on those little 4 features in your environment, super easy to do. You can set the scope if you need to if you want to do some testing first, and you can actually see how it impacts your environment. Thus far, we've gotten some really good feedback on it, so we think this is a really strong feature that showcases ControlUp automation quite well. So I'm going to get into the next use case, and now this is ServiceNow integration. What we can do within ControlUp, what we just saw there is user experience optimization. Now we're getting into augmented troubleshooting. So with ServiceNow integration, what we have is we have issues that might be in your environment where you don't want to actually take any corrective action on. What you actually want to do is get more information, get more context surrounding the problem. You can imagine we're all at EUC admins, or if you're an EUC admin, you generally run into this where someone calls in, there's a ticket, there's not enough information in the ticket. And so it requires you to reach out either to your user or your customer and actually try to spend some time getting this additional information. Well, we can actually get that information for you within ControlUp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to ControlUp here, and I'm going to focus on my Acme environment, and I'm just going to go to sessions, and I'm going to sort by logon duration. So I'm going to scroll over here, and I'm actually already sorted by logon duration. So we can see I've got several users who have some significant logon duration issues. What I can do is I can actually click on Jim Slow here, and I can actually open ServiceNow. So we've already got the integration in. What ControlUp does is it detects if the logon duration has exceeded a certain threshold, and if it does, it'll log that as a ticket to ControlUp with running the script-based action already. So if I click on Open ServiceNow, it's going to open ServiceNow for me. And if I go to my incidents all, we can see all the different tickets that we're auto-creating based on these high thresholds that are occurring. So for instance, I'm actually going to look at Amir here. He's at 42 seconds. So if I click on Amir and click on his ticket, what we can see is now we get a detailed view of exactly what was going on within his logon. So as opposed to having the user just call in saying my logon was slow, and then the help desk just recording that and sending that off to you, now we can get that ticket auto-created, complete with all the relevant information we need to start troubleshooting. So we can see his logon duration was about 43 seconds. His user profile was very fast. We don't need to look at troubleshooting his user profile. We don't need to look at troubleshooting his group policy. 4.3 seconds is very acceptable. We can see that he doesn't have a startup script or anything like that that would be causing his issue. And we can see that his shell was about 36 seconds. It being the shell, we can now begin to actually troubleshoot that process. At what point was his shell causing his logon duration to be slow? Is it that the image wasn't updated properly? Does it still have the Apex packages installed in it, or so on and so forth? So now we can actually begin to troubleshoot without actually having to reach out to the user to collect this additional information or have them do some kind of further testing. ControlUp can gather all of this augmented troubleshooting for you, so that way it can help you do your job faster and better. And so what does this look like? How does this automation, how do you enable this automation? So what we've got is I've got a trigger here, and we're actually looking at for ServiceNow, if the logon duration is greater than 25 seconds, run analyze and create a ServiceNow incident. So within here, we're targeting a session record. We're targeting logon duration is greater than or equal to 25. And you can see we're actually excluding one particular user here. He's a known problem user. Maybe he's got something in his particular setup that's always going to generate a ticket. So we just chose to exclude him. But for everyone else, if the logon duration is greater than or equal to 25 seconds, we're going to run this script action. So AAS ServiceNow logon duration incident that we wrote. And so what does this look like? If I go into the script action, and we can see it right here, ServiceNow logon duration incident. If I choose to modify it, we can see it's assigned to the session object, and its execution context is the target machine, and it's running as the local system on that machine. And the script for it is essentially our analyze logon duration script, which is the very end, us piping that response out to ServiceNow. So very simple, very easy to add ServiceNow integration into any of the scripts that we have or any scripts that you want to write for yourself. And then same as the arguments are all the same as what our classic analyze logon duration script properties are. So we think that's pretty cool. And we think that this is an example in a way of how you can increase your ability to augment your troubleshooting within your environment. Okay, so now I'm actually going to get into remediation. So we touched on the first one, optimizing the user experience. The second one, augmented troubleshooting. Now we're going to get into automatic remediation. So when most people think of automation, they tend to think of how it can be used to help solve the problem for you. Well, it certainly can. And let me get into how it can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on my Horizon environment here. So I'm looking at my Horizon pod environment, and we can see that I've got a series of desktops here. And what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the new metrics that we have within ControlUp. So I've got my Horizon state, which is the state of the agent connecting into the connection server. Is it good? Is it available? Are the machines healthy? This is what this is telling us. By them being available, everything looks good. They're ready for users to be connected to them, and they're not in maintenance mode, so users are able to connect in and things should be operating correctly. However, what happens if they're not? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simulate a failure. So I'm actually just going to right click on this machine and go manage services. And within ControlUp, we'll go into the ControlUp controllers view, where we can actually manage these different resources all from within ControlUp. And I'm going to go down to the VMware Horizon view agent, and I'm actually going to stop it to simulate a failure. So now it's executing that command on that machine. If I go back to my organization, because ControlUp is a real-time product, it's actually going to pick up that the state has changed from available to agent unreachable. And what we're going to do now is we've got a series of criteria here that's going to cause an automated action to execute. So if I go to triggers, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to look at the trigger for this. I've actually got 3 sets of triggers. So I've got one operating at 10 minutes, one at 15, and one at 20. So at the 10-minute one, what we're looking at is a machine record. And I'm looking at a series of criteria here. So I'm looking, is this collection true? So are any of these agent states true? Is the agent unreachable, in an error, unknown, already used, or domain failure? Or is the Horizon state mode also set to false? Because if it's set to false, then it should be operating. If someone was working on it, it'd be set to true, and then maybe that's why it's in that state. Is the VM powered on, and is there no one logged into it? So because all of these are true and their agent state is unreachable, it's going to execute this action, restart the VMware Horizon agent. And so what we can see is that ControlUp is actually going to determine that this is in a failure state, and it's actually going to run a script on this box. And we can actually tell it's running the script because the CPU went up a little bit because it's executing a PowerShell script to actually solve this problem. And boom, our Horizon state is now back to available. So what does this look like? If we've looked at the trigger, now let's look at the script. So if I look at this script, we can actually see within the settings, we're assigning it to the machine. Our execution context is the target machine again, and we're executing on the local system. The script is very simple. It's essentially a net stop, net start, but I'm doing it in PowerShell for a little bit of extra magic. Essentially, I'm getting the service, and then I'm trying to stop it, and then I'm checking to make sure it's stopped, and then I'm just restarting it. And so I've got timers here for 45-second timeouts, just in case. And then I write my output saying ControlUp agent has started successfully. So that's it, very simple. And now if you've got a large environment, you have to do checks at like 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning to make sure they're ready for users who are logging in at 7 or 8. In the past, you'd have to try to go through and find these and execute all these remediation actions. And with ControlUp, we can actually do that automatically for you. So we think this is, again, pretty exciting, very powerful, and we're super excited to see what people do in their environments. So let's get into ControlUp Insights. So I'm going to just do a quick overview, and then I want to touch into 2 of the features that I find very valuable. So the sizing recommendations and the session details. So if I go back to my ControlUp, what I can do to access it is there's actually the ControlUp Insights button up here. If I click on it, ControlUp will actually pass through authentication into Insights for me. And from here, we get our view of our top insights. So this is everything that has occurred over the last little while, and we can actually see anything that could be new from yesterday. All right, so now we're in environmental assessment, and we can actually see how things have been trending over the last little while. So we can see our session count over this last little bit, our CPU utilization on our host level, computer usage on the actual virtual machine level, memory usage, and so on and so forth. And one of the cool things that we have within ControlUp is we noticed we can actually take all of this interesting information, all of this aggregate information, and we can actually do something neat. So we can actually recommend your VMs to be of a certain size. We know how much CPU utilization they're using based on both the host level and the virtual machine level. We can do some intelligence in there to actually aggregate that information and produce it in a way that we can say whether you need to add more CPUs or remove CPUs and so on and so forth. So looking at this one machine here, PVS 1901, we can see that he's actually got 4 CPUs assigned to him, but he's barely clipped a 25% CPU utilization. Based over the information we have over the last month, we can pretty confidently say we should reduce the number of CPUs he has from 4 down to 1, because he's just not consuming that much resources for it to be worth him using more virtual CPUs and having your hypervisor scheduler working that much harder. And as well, we can actually see his memory utilization is actually quite low. So again, his 95th percentile is about 36% of 36% of the amount that he's using, which ends up being about 4 gigs. At ControlUp, we have logic built in to give it a little bit of buffer, so we're actually recommending 7 gigabytes, which will actually reduce the amount from 12 to 7 is what we're recommending. And you can see over that historical time period that it never really exceeded that. And then obviously the true is in reverse as well, where we can actually recommend you adding memory because you're always so close to the peak, or you are at the peak, and same with CPU utilization. So we think those are some pretty cool things that we can offer within this tool. And so what else I want to get into is actually the session details. And so what we can look at is if we're looking at a user session, I'm going to choose a different user. I'm going to choose myself here. And so what it does is it produces a Gantt chart of the user session and the user state and how they were actually operating. So we can see I went from active to idle to active to idle to active to disconnected, back to active, back to disconnected. We can see all my clients that I was connecting in from, so all the same client. We can see all the processes that I was starting as I was using my session and as I was going forth with it. And as well, if we scroll down further, we can actually see the CPU utilization of how that user was actually using their session and how it added on to the actual computer CPU utilization. So out of 17.2% at this one particular time period, I was using 9.5%. And then it'll actually show me my memory utilization. So again, we can see when I went from active to idle to active to idle. So we can actually see those trim effects working in real time. And so once I had terminated my last one and went to idle, it sliced my memory down to pretty much nothing. My I/O utilization, my protocol latency as I was actually using ControlUp, I was actually using my session within here, and protocol bandwidth, and so on and so forth. So lots of really cool, lots of really neat metrics within ControlUp. Very feature rich if you're looking from the historical perspective for what you can explore and what you can see in order to go back in time to understand what a user was doing or what a user was experiencing. And so now I would like to get into ControlUp Analyzer. So this is a tool more for the virtualization administrators out there. It can certainly be used by the EUC admins as well if you happen to be doing dual hatting or having multiple roles. We have this new product called ControlUp Analyzer. It was introduced in August at VMworld for us. So I'm going to just go back into ControlUp here, and I'm just going to show Analyzer. So I'm going to focus on my Acme environment and look at my hosts. And what I can do is if I click on this, I can actually open ControlUp Analyzer from within ControlUp. And I'm just going to log into it. And what ControlUp Analyzer does is it analyzes your virtualization environment for anything that's outside of the scope of the best practices. Best practices could be HIPAA, so if you're in healthcare, it could be STIG, if you're in Department of Defense or in one of those type of super security sensitive areas. So what we can see in the dashboard is it gives us our high level view of what's going on in our environment. We can actually choose to analyze now if we want to run the analyzer. Otherwise, you can set it to run on the schedule. And what I'm going to look at is just some of the best practices. And so this is telling us where we're failing to meet the VMware or the STIG or the HIPAA best practices, whatever you choose to focus on for your environment. So we can look at our Horizon. We should apply Horizon patches. It's detected that we're missing some of those. We can see our availability, ensure redundancy for each port group is not configured. So it's telling us to do that, and it's giving us a link to the URL where we could do that. Okay, and with that, I would just like to say thank you, and you can download a free 21-day trial at controlup.com to get you started we don't have any requirement for setting up a sales call. We think the product is intuitive enough that you can actually get started all on your own, but we certainly do recommend that you reach out to us.
Yeah, if you want a personalized demo, we can do that too. So however you want to reach out to us and whatever action you want to take, we're ready to go.
All right, so I think we'll just review the questions here and then we'll get back to everybody.
Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.